All right. Hello. My name is Velth. My pronouns are he and him, and welcome to the basics of tank armor. Um, the disclaimer at the head of this video is that this is not going to teach you how to use a tank. This is purely about how to understand the mechanics around tank armor, what it is, what it does for you, and how you can overcome it. So first, we're going to do a little overview. Um, we're going to cover the basic attributes the vehicles can have. We're going to go over the different armor tiers and what they mean, and why they're different from the actual vehicle attributes. We're going to then talk directly about tank armor and how it operates, and then we're going to talk about armor piercing and how to get through tank armor. Also, I've figured out how to John Madden stuff now, so I'm going to be doing that instead of having live drawings, particularly because for this topic, there's not really much that you can visualize. It's mostly just numbers. All right, so vehicle attributes, right? Uh, Obviously, you have vehicle health. This is the most straightforward one. When you run out of hit points, you die. Vehicle health is also impacted by also impacts the disable threshold. So every vehicle will have a percentage disable threshold. When your HP goes below that value, the vehicle can no longer move, which tends to mean that it dies because if you're getting shot at and something brings you that low and you can't move away from it, it's probably going to kill you in the next second or two. Um, there are resistances. Um, I've listed two here, general and particular. Resistances are you have some percentage of the incoming damage mitigated. Um, there's kind of two types, general and particular. Particular resistances are resistances against a particular damage type. General resistances are just general resistances, resistance to any damage that you might get hit by. There are immunities, which I've got two kinds. True immunity is the kind of immunity that structures have against small arm fire. There's also certain armors that grant immunities where you take zero damage. For example, every vehicle is immune to gas damage. You simply can't destroy a vehicle with a gas grenade. There's also near immunity. This is different because you can still technically take damage from the object. So, for example, tanks are not immune to 7.62 rounds. They are nearly immune to 7.62 rounds, which means that instead of taking the full damage or some reduced amount of damage, they take exactly 1 point of damage per bullet. Um, which does technically mean that you could 7.62 down an entire tank, but I don't really recommend it. Um, then you got tank armor. Tank armor gives you a chance to bounce certain incoming projectiles, which makes them deal zero damage. And whenever you have tank armor, you'll know both because you'll have a bounce chance and because you will have an armor health pool. Um, there's also subsystems on most vehicles. These will be the tracks, the engine, which is the oil pan rather, and the turret. These are essentially things that can get disabled on the vehicle. Disabling the turret disables the main weapon so it can't fire. Disabling the tracks makes it so that you move much slower and you can't cross certain gaps anymore. And disabling the oil pan means that you leak fuel at a pretty rapid pace. All of these things continue until you fully restore the HP of the vehicle up to 100%. Um, but we're not going to be too concerned with that. So armor tiers is something that you might also hear people refer to. The reason why I don't like to think about things in these terms is because while it's true that a vehicle might be assigned an armor tier, so for example, armored cars are tier 1, tanks, scout tanks, tankettes, and everything up from that is tier 2, and trucks and things like that are tier 0. So you can kind of group them in these ways in order to get an understanding of how they operate. Um, these tiers are entire packages of different mechanics, which is why I tend not to prefer them. But you can see here, tier 0, those Logi trucks and whatnot, they've got some resistance to certain types of small arm damage. So this is 7.62. They've got resistances to 20 millimeter rounds. some high explosive damages, but it's not nothing huge, nothing that's really going to save them. Particularly because a lot of these vehicles also have very high disable points, so you don't tend to, to have to worry about it. The most important vehicles that these resistances might apply to are the light utility vehicles, and that's just because those actually have enough hit points and a high enough disable percentage to maybe uh, make some use of their resistances. Um, Tier 1, this is your armored cars, uh, and I believe your half tracks. They are nearly immune to small arms fire, so they still take that 1 point of damage. Um, they become immune to things like incendiary damage, but not to the like being near a building on fire. So if you shoot a flamethrower directly at them, it'll do nothing. But if you park them on top of a burning building, they will still get destroyed. Um, they gain resistances to what's called heavy kinetic ammunition, which is pretty much just 12.7 millimeter, um, and to shrapnel damage. And in these tier 1 categories, they gain tank armor. So they have a bounce chance and they have a tank armor pool. Um, and then at tier 2, which is tankettes, scout tanks, and everything up from that, uh, they become nearly immune to 12.7, shrapnel, standing in the fire. They keep all of the resistances of the tier 1, um, and they also gain this 9% sort of general resistance to incoming damage. They obviously also still have tank armor, bounce chance, things like that. All right, so let's talk about tank armor then. Tank armor is specifically about giving you a chance to ignore the incoming damage from certain damage types. This is largely things like RPGs, 20 millimeter, 30 millimeter, 40, 68, all the sort of direct fire explosive damages that you might encounter. Um, Tank armor consists of two main features, a base penetration chance and an armor pool. Um, so you might have, say, like a 25% base pen chance, and let's say you've got 10,000 armor points, right? What this means is that when you're initially shot at, right, let's say by a 40 millimeter cannon, right, there is a 25% chance that you will ignore the damage from that shell completely. It'll just ricochet off you. It'll do absolutely nothing to you. However, if you were to miss that 25% chance to bounce the shell, right? A 600 or a 440, excuse me, millimeter shell does 600 damage, right? Which means that you'll lose the full amount of hit points, and you will have that subtracted from your total armor pool, meaning that you'll now have 9,400 armor after you haul that shot, right? This is important because this base penetration chance, right, is not fixed and permanent. If it was the case, so you start off being able with a 25% chance to bounce shots, but let's say that you wind up taking damage, right, repeatedly, and this you can take damage repeatedly because this 600 damage is both to your health and your armor pool. So here, let me real quick. So you got your 25% bounce chance, right? You've got your 10,000 armor points, and then let's say your tank only has like 1,200 hit points, right? You take 600 damage, you wind up with 600 hit points, right? And you wind up with 9,400 armor points, and you still have your 25% pen chance, right? This HP, right, over here, this can get healed back up in the field with hammers. So, let's say you take that shell, you don't want to die, so you go back, you repair, you're back up to 1,200 hit points, right? This armor pool, however, does not refresh. Over time, unless you take your tank the whole way back to a garage and have it re-armored in the garage, this value of your armor pool is going to keep going down. And at a certain point, right, let's say this one comes down to being only 2,000 armor points left, right? Your base pen chance is no longer your actual bounce chance. It is now instead going to be 20%. The reason for that is uh, when you decide how much bounce chance you're going to have, you compare your base pen chance, which in here was 25, against, let's just give it a little one of these. That's not the right mathematical symbol, but whatever. Against your current armor divided by your total. So essentially, uh, you could also say that this is your percent remaining, right? And so since at this point you've only got 20% of your armor remaining, you now have at most a 20% bounce chance, regardless of what your base bounce chance was going to be. Um, so all of this is written from kind of the opposite perspective of the base pen chance. So if you're an attacker, rather than thinking about this as a 25% bounce chance, you think of it as a 75% chance to pen. And down here, this would be, 75% chance to pen versus uh, like, 1 minus this value to give you the percent pen chance, and you take the higher of the two. Um, so all of that is to say that like you want to both look at what is the bounce chance of your tank, right? And how much armor does it have, because that determines how many shells you can eat before you start corroding your armor to the point that incoming shells are going to be more and more and more likely to be able to hull, right? And it kind of also has this cascading effect of the worse your armor gets, the more likely you are to hull a shot. The more likely you are to hull a shot, the more likely you are to wind up having even less armor HP, because every hulled shot removes from your armor hit points. You're also more likely to get burst by multiple shots hitting you simultaneously. And so as your armor quality decreases, you tend to get an exponentially shorter lifespan on your vehicle. So this brings us to armor piercing, right? If tank armor is a bounce chance and an armor HP pool, and we just sort of take whichever one of those is worse, right, for the tank, um, armor piercing is kind of what can an attacker do in order to change the odds of being able to penetrate a tank, right? Um, this comes in sort of two or three categories. You've got the concept of what weapon you're going to use, right? That has an impact on the bounce chance. Um, you have to worry about like the distance at which you're going to be firing from, and you have to worry about both the angle and where you're hitting the tank at simultaneously. Um, so, as we stated originally, only certain types of weapons have a chance to bounce and therefore have a chance to pen. Weapons that can't be bounced always do their damage. So things like 7.62 or shrapnel grenades, they can't have their damage bounced off of tank armor, which means that they always do their damage. The downside being that damage is severely mitigated due to either resistances, immunities, or near immunities. Um, Weapons that can bounce always include a multiplier to their penetration chance. This multiplier is often 1 for a lot of the most common stuff, so like 20, 30, 40 millimeter, that's all 1. But certain weapons will have like a 1.5 chance, a 2, or a 2.5% chance. And then you have the uh, so that's just like the type of weapon that you're using impacting your probability of getting a penetration. You then also have circumstantial things like the angle and location. These are always paired together. Tanks, right? If you think of a tank like this, and then you draw an X through it, roughly like that, and you define this as the front, right? Everything else has a chance to have uh, reduced armor or reduced bounce chance. Um, I say a chance to have that because in order to get a like better chance of penetrating, you have to fire anywhere but the front and at a 70 to 90 degree angle. So that's roughly looking like that, right? So essentially, if you get like kind of a perpendicular hit anywhere but on the front, you get an increased chance to penetrate. Um, it's also true that if you fire at a tank from, let's give it a little scattered 10-meter range, right? Firing at a tank from anywhere within this 10-meter range, right, gives you another flat increase to your pen chance. So um, the weapon that you're using, right? This is always a multiplier, whereas uh, angle, location, and distance are always flat penetration chances. Um, if you have both the right angle and um, the right facing on the tank, you're getting a 40% flat pen chance increase. And if you're just within 10 meters, you're getting a 25% flat pen chance increase. This doesn't apply to things that are kind of thrown. So like throwing a flask or a sticky grenade, right? Both of those weapons don't have a bounce chance to begin with, but also like they don't have any extra chance of like doing damage from hitting different angles, right? It's also important to remember that this multiplier, right, is applied to the base pen chance of the tank, which means that the thing that makes the multipliers more powerful is the tank having less armor. Whereas these changes of like from having the correct angle and hitting them in the side, or from firing within a certain distance, these are flat pen increases, which means that these are really, really powerful against tanks that are at full armor already. So if you're going up against a tank that looks pristine, best thing to do, hit it in the side and at this steep angle, and then once it's worked its armor down, any of the weapons that have like a percent multiplier are really quickly going to be able to bite into this thing even from the front. Um, so this is just a quick overview of the different like damage types that you have access to. So these are all like your most common shells. These are sort of the HE 40 millimeter tend to be PVE weapons. Then you got the 68, the ATRPGs, and the Ignis. These are all, if you like, your dedicated anti-tank weapons because they don't have very much structure damage. Uh, you've obviously got like the larger cannons from the facility vehicles, the battle tanks, and the super heavies, but I don't super care about those. And then you've got the most interesting one, the ARC RPGs, which have this huge multiplier, but absolutely nothing for distance facing or getting like into the side armor. Um, it's kind of to make up for the fact that like it's really hard to judge whether or not the weapon was fired correctly from those positions. But this 2.5 times multiplier is pretty darn solid. Okay, so we're gonna do the wrap up. So what about all of this, right? Generally speaking, if you're infantry, you should always be trying to fire from within 10 meters and into the side. If you do that alone, you've got a 65% chance to pen the enemy's armor. Um, and then the absolute lowest uh, like chance for penetration that you will ever have, it's the Widow with a 17%, which means that if you add that on top of your flat pen chance, you get an 82% chance of penetrating from within 10 meters in the side, no matter what you are shooting at, no matter what its armor is, no matter what you are firing with, which is pretty pretty darn good, you know? So if you're an infantryman, always think about, can I get the tank to come closer? Can I get around into the side of the tank? And can I get my weapon to hit like at a good, 70 to 90 degree angle? Um, when you're firing shots into the front, right? What you probably want to be thinking about is just volume of fire. Front armor tends to be pretty darn good even on the worst of things. Like even the scout tank and the tankette will bounce at least half of the shots that come in at them from outside of 10-meter range. Um, and firing at a tank, like if you're trying to think like, well, maybe I can fire like at a shallow angle and hit the tank back here, it doesn't particularly matter. Firing from, you know, this shallow of an angle isn't going to gain you anything, and firing from range isn't going to gain you anything either. So you might as well just smack them in the very front armor and just go for hitting them with as many shots as you can in the hopes that you're going to be able to overcome it. Um, you shouldn't be deterred. You shouldn't think like, well, I've only got a 25% chance of penetrating a shot, so I shouldn't even go for it. Because remember, um, You're wearing down the enemy's armor. On a lot of the heaviest tanks, like the Warden vehicles, it could take maybe 13 shells before you start appreciably deteriorating their ability to bounce shots. But you know, who really cares? Like, you might as well go for it. Their armor is not going to get reduced unless you take those shots. Obviously, if you're able to, it'd be better to get the like guaranteed pens so that you can really make sure that you're chipping away at their armor. But taking the roll of the dice in order to slowly work them down is a great idea because once that armor HP pool is deteriorated, the higher base pen chance and the higher armor pool are no longer making a difference, right? That sort of idea that like your lifespan exponentially drops off as your armor pool decreases really comes into play. So uh, always, if you can, if you have enough AT, feel free to take those chances. But if you're going to like try and confirm a kill, or if you really want to make sure that you're doing damage, abruptly, so like if you're worried about there's a large volume of tanks and you need to be able to get kills on them in order to trim them down, you want to be going for this short range fighting. Um, Weapons with multipliers, they tend to ramp up their damage faster than the other weapons. They care more about how dirty the enemy tank is, because they're going to be getting that multiplier onto uh, that sort of degraded armor rather than um, they don't benefit uniquely powerfully from firing into the side or things like that. So if you have, say, 68s, or if you have ATRPGs, right? Like, hitting an enemy in the side is nice and all, but what you really want is to hit enemy tanks that like already have some of their armor degraded because you're going to be multiplying that degradation even further. Um, and then, lastly, this is kind of just a fun trivia thing. You can technically kill any tank with just regular bullets. You can damage them just by shooting at them. Um, I've heard people say that you can technically track them. Um, I don't really think that that's true. I do not know exactly what is required in order to track a vehicle, whether it is like you just have a percentage chance per damage dealt, or if it's like it has to be damage from a certain type of weapon. Um, but like one thing to consider is even like the wimpiest of tanks tend to have maybe like 1,200 hit points, right? And even some of the fastest firing machine guns can only put out maybe say 300 rounds per minute, which means that if you had say one machine gun and you're going to fire at a tank until it dies, assuming that you absolutely never had to reload, you'd have to fire at it for 4 minutes solid, hitting every single shell, never reloading, uh, in order to take it out, which is obviously just not useful. Um, I hope all of this has been at least a bit informative for folks who are starting out. I would really like to see more people do this idea of like waiting for tanks to get really close and practicing getting their shots into the right angles, especially for guys using ignifists and cutlers, weapons that kind of notoriously are harder to use and get to bite it, harder to get to bite in onto the armor. Doing this takes you from I am probably going to bounce the majority of my shots to I'm almost certainly going to pen and I'd be kind of surprised if I didn't, which is a huge deal. But you tend to see infantry playing a lot more of this game where they take like ATRs or Typhons and fire them at the absolute max range into front armor, which means that they only hull maybe like 20% of the shots, and that's fine. Um, I know I am advocating for that here as well, but uh, typically when you're doing that, you're kind of thinking like, well, I'm going to see whether or not I can like slowly work down the enemy armor. Like it's a good strategy against tanks that are still fresh, but at the point that you've got those guys looking kind of dirty, like give up on these tactics, right? Give up on these tactics and wait for them to get close. Trust me, you're going to get a lot more tank kills doing that. So that's all for now. Hope you all have a good one, and I'll catch you all later.